Alistair and I will present this afternoon about how we can predict behavior of low-income consumers in emerging markets. And I think why this is, where's the clicker actually? Here. Why this is interesting is because this opens up a real market for us agencies and also for our clients. The way we're going to go through the next half hour or so will be that I'll give a short introduction why I think this topic is relevant to you all. Then I'll hand over to my partner Alistair of Untitled Research, who will explain from his expertise the mobile internet, why this is so important and how we've accessed these consumers. And then for the last 15 minutes, I will quickly give you a glimpse of the results and how we've set up this study on smart and feature phones. So, why is this of interest? Well, I think consider 70 million people every year going through the threshold of being poor to middle class. A report of about 5 years ago from McKinsey indicated that in the next decade, that's only 5 years from today, every year for the 70 million additional consumers with spending power enter the global economy. In the past, we've always talked about BRIC markets, which were only 4 markets, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And when the British economist John O'Neill tossed the coin BRIC, he actually said BRICS, with the S for South Africa, there were 5 markets. In the last decade, we know we're not only talking about these 4 markets, but we included Eastern Europe because they have the similar characteristics. We included Turkey, and nowadays people talk about the N11, which is the next 11, which includes also countries like Nigeria and Indonesia and similar countries with similar growth characteristics. So we have a very much lots of new consumers coming every year. We have them in all the emerging markets in the world, but furthermore, their spending power is also enormous. In similar more recent reports of McKinsey in 2015, they actually measured the spending power of these 2 billion people, and those 2 billion people together spend about $7 trillion of products that are bought by our clients. In 10 years' time, in 2025, this will be tripled to 20 trillion. And to put it into perspective, that is 2 times the amount of the consumer power currently of the whole US. Yeah, so this is the fastest growing market and the growing target group that there is in the last century. So that's why it's important that obviously we target them and we learn what their consumer behavior is. So at the same time, we've talked a lot this morning about developing research methods. And when I started 20 years ago as a researcher, we still did a lot of pen and paper. Then we moved on to, how do we calculate that? And we have the punch card. And then we did a lot of phone interviews 10, 15 years ago. And obviously in the last decade or 5 years, we use online, and we're talking about mobile today. But consider the owner of SKIM, which is the research agency that I worked with. He started the SKIM 35 years ago. And SKIM is sort of specialized in very advanced analytics and conjoint research methodologies. And the way that Dirk, the owner, started 35 years ago, he used pen and paper to talk to individual consumers and ask their preferences and their trade-offs. And he would note those trade-offs down on pen and paper, put them into punch cards, put them in a machine like this, which is only the end of the 70s. And then the punch card machine could calculate all these different iterations and then predict the preferences and therefore the choice of consumers. This is only 30, 40 years ago. And obviously now with all the new technologies, this also enables us to use this technology to the wider masses or the middle class. And lastly, before I hand over to Alistair, what's really important here is that the middle class is obviously also getting more demanding. While having access to the mobile phone, whether or not be a smartphone or a feature phone, they obviously increased their knowledge about consumers. And as we all know, Google is only a few clicks away. They also expect nowadays that the research they do or how the manufacturers engage with them is also much more demanding, and the level is much higher. As we heard this morning, you can't really engage with these consumers on hour-long discussions or even 30-minute surveys already long. So that's why I think it's also, it's not just the access that the mobile phone allows, but also the convenience and the fact that it can be immediate, where we have much better results. And Alistair will tell you a little bit more how we did that.
Thanks very much, Robert. So it's fascinating to see the data from Robert about the size of the opportunity for, well, not only Western companies, but the companies in many of these emerging markets as well. 25 trillion is quite a large number. And so it's fascinating to see this kind of revolution happening at the moment. But there's also another revolution happening at exactly the same time, and that's the mobile revolution, which I guess we all know about here. I'll talk about that and then talk about some of the methodologies which we used to collect this data, which we did with SKIM. But first of all, just a quick introduction to on-device research, which some of you may know, some of you may not know. We're around 5 years old, done around 30 million surveys now across 90 countries, all on the mobile internet. We've got offices in Singapore, Dubai, and in London. And so that's the end of the advert. So back to the mobile revolution. So everybody knows that lots of people have mobile phones, and it's said at so many of these conferences. But I just wanted to put this one chart up for an amazing presentation, which is called Mobiles Eating the World, I think is what it's called. It's done by a former colleague of mine who works now at a really large venture capital firm in the US. And what it helps us to understand is really the size and scale of the opportunity that mobile really provides. And so what you can see to the far left over there is the number of PCs that are in existence. So there's around 1.2 billion PCs. And if you look at the penetration of that, it's basically around 600 to 800 million people, because there's an awful lot of people who use one for home, one at work, and things like that. And it's basically people in Western Europe, the US, Japan, and a few other countries. If you look now to the amount of smartphones, you can see there's around 2 billion, and that's going to rise to around 4 billion over the next couple of years. And so when you look at that in terms of the amount of adults that are out there, it's going to be around 80% penetration of the global adults will have a smartphone and have connectivity to the mobile internet. And so really, when you look at the PC and the internet, desktop internet revolution that's happened, say, 10 years ago, it almost looked quaint, kind of in comparison to what's happening with mobile. And so this is happening now. So when we look into South Africa, and this is some data from people called StatCounter, we can see that basically the mobile internet is the internet in emerging markets. What we can see is around 80% of usage of the internet in South Africa is mobile internet usage. So if we're going to help our clients to connect with this fantastic opportunity of this 25 trillion or so worth of spend, we need to really connect with them with the device that they're using. So, mobile internet panels enable this to happen. So if we look at our panel in Indonesia, we can see that around 63% of the people on it don't have access to a computer at home. So we're getting access to the mobile-only consumers. But we have to be very upfront with all of our clients. There isn't 100% penetration of mobile internet usage at the moment. And so we need to work out what is the profile of these people, and actually what is that data which we collect, what is it meaningful of? So what we can see here is a profile of the sample which we can gain access to compared to the census data. And so in Indonesia, what you can see is that there's a skew towards younger people. So the data which we are going to be showing later on today is representative of those people who are 16 to 4 years old. We cut off there. We don't even try to get people older than that because it isn't representative of those people who are over the age of 45 years old. But what you can also see here is if you add up the census data for those people between the ages of 16 and 44, you can see that's around 75% of the adult population. And so a lot of our clients, what they're interested in is selling goods and services to young people quite often, and they're not as interested in those older demographics. But what a lot of our clients are interested in is gaining access to this emerging middle class. And so what you can see here from this data, which is a comparison between the census data in South Africa and the data from the sample which we collect, we can see that for LSM classification, which is the way in which socioeconomic group is used in a lot of emerging markets, we can see that you can actually gain access to all different groups in South African society. There is a skew towards more affluent people, but actually you can see that we can get access to LSM 1 to 4, which is incredibly poor. I mean, that's like $1 a day sort of thing, but you can gain access to them. but also the mass market, which is LSM 5 to 7 in South Africa, which is it's a kind of strange sort of classification. You ask a whole variety of different questions around, do you have a maid in the house, or do you have an interesting thing called a geyser, which, if anybody's South African here, I don't know if they are, is a hot water tap, which I discovered a while ago because I couldn't quite work out what it was. So how do we make this whole thing work, and how would you make this work? The first thing is you need to have some survey technology that works on all web-enabled devices. If you're just limited to iPhone, for example, you're not going to be able to gain access to these low socioeconomic groups. So this here is a picture of survey technology which we use. It basically renders to any particular device and make sure that we can gain access to the broadest sample possible. The big thing about smartphones in emerging markets, which is different from here, we spend on average $600, something like that, on a smartphone. In South Africa or around Indonesia and in many of these countries, the average price is around $40. So they have a processor in them, but it's not the same as the processor that we have. And they have connectivity, but it's not the same as what we have. So you need to make sure that the survey software is very light and can load on these devices and not kill the devices or just basically mess up when you're trying to ask people questions. The next thing is you need access to mobile-only sample. And so gaining an access panel and then trying to convert that over to mobile doesn't work, as we heard in some of the other presentations. And so what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to recruit mobile-only people. The way in which we do this is through a process called dynamic sampling. We've developed a network of mobile publishers, so apps, games, social networks, things like this, services that people are using on their phones, and in effect we're placing adverts into that, asking them whether they'd like to take surveys with us for a reward, which is generally airtime, so they get credit on their phone as a swap for telling us their opinion. A lot of these people have now come into our panel as well, so we use a combination of the panel and the dynamic sampling. And third, and by no means least, we need to have mobile survey best practice. So on your tables, you can see a report that we've recently done into survey length. This is one element of our best practice which we've built up over time. You can't simply take an online survey and throw it onto mobile. You need to really think through the way in which you're doing that. And as you can see from the best practice or research on your table, there's huge implications for the length of survey that you should be doing on there. We've really studied this a lot. We have seen some scandalous companies out there trying to do 30-minute surveys on mobile phones, which is laughable, but it is happening. But what you can see from the research is you'll get very bad data if you try to do that. And so if we combine all of these three things together, we can get very good quality data. And so if we go into the study which we did with SKIM, what we can see is we did it across 3 different mobile-only countries, so Brazil, Indonesia, and South Africa. We asked around 1,200 people. We used all of the techniques which we have just discussed previously. This survey was around 8.5 minutes long, was very complex, as Robert will go on to explain, and it enables them to create a very compelling solution. But the thing which is really interesting to highlight is around 80% of the people in Brazil were earning less than £500 per month. Around half in Indonesia and South Africa were earning around the same amount as well. So I'll now pass over to Robert, who will give you the highlights of the study.
Thanks. So, very robust sample. What Alison forgot to mention is that we did this in a few days, very quick, and a very young and low-income base group that we targeted. So what do? We focused this study on painkillers because we wanted to predict the behavior of this target group in terms of how would they buy painkillers. The technique we used is traditional conjoint or trade-off analysis, which is a very, I would say, advanced statistical technique that we often use, but much more in other contexts. I don't think it's ever used on a mobile phone, smartphone, let alone feature phones. So we broke this prediction problem in a few big buckets. We thought, well, if we know the preference of these young individuals in terms of their brand, in terms of how many pills or capsules they want in each pack, what dosage they prefer, what price they would prefer, either in real, rand, or rupiah, or the 2 formats that are available, either tablets, which are more traditional, or more advanced innovations in terms of capsules. If you would calculate these combinations, obviously this is, was it 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 2, 162 individual combinations in each market to do this on a feature phone. Is this possible? Well, yes, it is. And we've showed that it's possible. The outcome of this is that for each of the individual responses, we determine the preferences, and based on the preferences, we can actually calculate what they choose. So I'll show you a few of the outcomes here. Before I show that, I actually show how we did that and how it looked. We've asked consumers 7 choice tasks, 5 choice tasks of choosing between 2, and 2 choice tasks of choosing between 3. And you can see the different brands that we actually showed on the device. For each task, there was just 1 click necessary to make the choice. And the other questions we've asked are 3 screening questions and 2 profile questions and 1 open question. So actually with 13 tabs, the whole survey was done, as Alice has said, within 9 minutes. Additional insights that you can ask on the mobile that we've asked why. So why are concept and motivating? This is an open question. It's the only open question we had. In other surveys that we regularly do, we, for instance, also ask questions more on pricing or on particular flavors or whatever you can. Obviously, you need to limit yourself to 10 or 14 minutes and not go on to 30 minutes as that is best practice. A little bit of the findings. As you can see, Brazilian consumers, they prefer brand as their most important attribute of the 5 I've showed you. So the number of pieces within the package, the dosage, the price, or the type didn't really contribute a lot to their decision behavior. So brand really was the dominant factor here. That's very different in the other countries, for instance. When we look within brand, we showed them the 3 brands, Tylenol from Mead Johnson, Anador, which is a generic, and Novalgina, which for the people that know the market a little bit is for Sanofi Aventis. Within the brand, clearly Tylenol had the biggest brand preference, considering all the other attributes being the same. When we flip that around and we look at the other factors, you can see that the attributes in terms of price, in terms of dosage and the number of pills per package, the Brazilians like always the biggest option. Yeah? So when we've asked them, what do you like, 30, 20 or 10 pills, considering all the other attributes the same, price the same, brand the same, etc., they choose 30. And similarly for the dosage, they choose the biggest dosage. And this is very characteristic for Brazilians. If you do this, we've done this in the other markets as well, this is also very, very different behavior. When we put all these attributes in one, and we model and we use all the preferences, and we say, okay, based on all these 5 preferences, attributes and the preference within those, 45% of all the Brazilian consumers that we sampled choose the Novalgina brand. So and as you've seen before, Novalgina is not by no means the most favorite brand, but because Novalgina, for instance, has a very, very high dosage and also a very number of tablets in the package, that was really gave the consumers the choice for Novalgina. As you can see, Tylenol lovers here, they prefer more capsules, so they're much more innovative. And on the left-hand side, on your right-hand side, you can actually see Anador, which is generic, which is bought basically because people want painkillers to be cheap. Yeah, so this is the kind of analysis that you can do based on 13 questions. The open question, the outcome of that was that in all countries that we surveyed, people use painkillers mainly for headache. But what was particularly unique to Indonesia, and I'm not sure who's been there, but I've been there last year coincidentally, it's been mainly used in Indonesia for relief and toothache. And that makes a lot of sense if you see those consumers there. That's the main usage, which again is very different in other markets. So just and last but not least, the country nuances here. Difference in Indonesia from, for instance, Brazil is that the country is very traditional, prefers tablets over capsules, very, very price sensitive, and the brands on your right-hand side are all very generic brands, so they don't go for the big manufacturer brands. And package and dosage are really key drivers of choice. Particularly not like the Brazilians that like to have more pills in a package, but actually the opposite. The Indonesians like things very small, dosage very, very low, and also only 1 or 2 pills in a package because it's also cheaper. Yeah, and they like to buy one thing at a time, one package at a time. So very good, very different country results. I think very clear results in terms of what drives behavior of these low-income consumers. But interestingly, one other thing that we looked is we used all these preferences to also calculate or predict their behavior. And we included one control question in the sample, which was a straight question out of the 3 options. And we compared the preferences and the prediction that we made on those preferences with the direct question. And we were very happy with the results that, if you have asked one straight question, the random chance of having one option is 33%. And we could predict based on these results 2 times better. So that really shows you that for these low-income consumers in these difficult markets, with only 12 or 13 questions, you can really do a lot of research that predict their behavior pretty accurate. So the question is obviously how useful is 2 times the random? Is that good enough for our clients? Well, consider the weather forecast. This is the weather forecast of the Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I like to compare, our prediction conjoined with weather forecasts. And obviously in 2005, the American weather forecasters didn't have it exactly right. They did predict the storm, but they didn't predict the severity nor obviously the huge damage. And consider the 2 times more random that we can predict with this kind of studies on feature phones to this massive market. I think it's certainly worth our effort and the effort of our clients. And with that, I would like to open for questions. Thank you.